I'm Margaret Brennan in Washington, and this week on Face the Nation, new economic jitters as turbulence over tariffs intensifies and President Trump fires the person who delivered Friday's weak jobs report. President Trump didn't like Friday's employment report.
I believe the numbers were phony, so you know what I did? I fired her.
Right. But what's behind those numbers? And the back and forth with the dozens of countries facing new tariffs later this week. We'll talk with Trump's top trade negotiator, Ambassador Jamieson Greer, Minister for Canadian-U.S. Trade Dominic LeBlanc. And for a look at how these developments are impacting Americans, Bank of America CEO Brian Moynihan will join us. Plus, what exactly is ahead for Americans who are on Medicare or Medicaid? We'll talk to the head of the agency that runs those programs, Dr. Mehmet Oz. New Mexico has the highest proportion of Medicaid recipients, and the state's Democratic Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham will also be here. It's all just ahead on Face the Nation. Good morning and welcome to Face the Nation. The jobs report that came out Friday was unexpected and disappointing. There is more uncertainty ahead for American businesses and consumers when it comes to President Trump's plans for imposing new tariffs on imports from some 70 countries, now expected this Thursday. On Friday, we spoke with Mr. Trump's trade representative, Ambassador Jamieson Greer, and we asked him whether he thought there was any chance those rates would be negotiated down in the coming days.
I don't think they will be in the coming days. I think a lot of these, well, I know a lot of these are set rates pursuant to deals. Some of these deals are announced, some are not. Others depend on the level of the trade deficit or surplus we may have with the country. So these tariff rates are pretty much set.
You said at some point the president's view is maybe a tariff is better than a deal. Are you saying there are countries that they have no shot of avoiding a tariff?
Most countries in the world, they just have a tariff assigned to them, right? Whether it's
it'll be the 10% or 15%.
10 or 15 or the higher level tariff. Because again, when the president is looking at this, he looks at potential deals, and we bring him potential concessions from countries and the things they might want to do. And he compares that to the potential tariff that might be applied to try to get that deficit down. And then talking to his advisors, he makes a call on this. And sometimes a country will come back and make additional concessions that make it more appropriate. He's trying to get at the deficit. He's trying to reshore manufacturing.
Trying to reshore manufacturing, bring manufacturing jobs back to America. But we just saw in this unemployment data that while the level's pretty low overall, it's pretty steady and good. Manufacturing in particular, we saw it contract for the 5th straight month in July. Factory employment dropped to lowest levels in 5 years. What does that data indicate to you about the impact of your tariffs? I
think a lot of companies were waiting to see if the tax bill was going to come through with the expensing for capital goods and things like that. And so I think now, a lot of that data comes pre One Big Beautiful Bill. Now that we have One Big Beautiful Bill and we have a better sense of where the taxes are going, I think we're going to see more investment. All the commitments on investment we've seen countries making, that's going to come through. So I don't read tariff policy into that number. I think that is kind of pre-bill policy.
The president just announced that the head of labor statistics is being fired because of the weak jobs report, claiming the data was faked.
Even last year during the campaign, there were enormous swings in the jobs numbers. And so it sounds to me like the president has real concerns, not just based on today's, but everything we saw last year. You want to be able to have somewhat reliable numbers. There are always revisions, but sometimes you see these revisions go in really extreme ways. And it's, the president is the president. He can choose who works in the executive branch.
Let me ask you about Canada, which is our second largest trading partner. The president increased tariffs to 35%. It applies, though, to just about 10% of what Canada sells here. Why bother to do this now in the middle of negotiations?
So I would say, first of all, early on, the president imposed a 25% tariff on Canada, and that was really about fentanyl and border issues, right? It's a separate regime from the reciprocal tariff. And what did Canada do in response? They talked about helping at the border, and I'm not the drug czar or anything. But what I do know, as the trade guy, is that Canada retaliated. The only other country in the world who retaliated on tariffs was the Chinese. And so if the president's going to take an action and the Canadians retaliate, the United States needs to maintain the integrity of our action, the effectiveness, so we have to go up to.
You're talking about the things that the former Prime Minister Trudeau put in place, not the current Prime Minister.
And are still in place.
They're still in place, but
Right.
the current Prime Minister has held off largely on retaliation here. That's the guy you're negotiating with and his team. So what's the strategy here? And aren't you worried that this will hurt the broader free trade deal if you truly do want to renegotiate it next year?
I'm not concerned that it's going to complicate things with Canada. Our view is the president is trying to fix the terms of trade with Canada, and if there's a way to a deal, we'll find it. And if it's not, we'll have the tariff levels that we have.
So I hear you drawing distinctions when you say, I'm the trade guy, I'm not the drug czar.
Correct.
I'm the trade guy, I'm not handling these other things. But the president is kind of blending all these things together because he cited fentanyl once again when it came to the policy with Canada. He also said on social media, Canada's decision to back statehood for Palestine is going to make it hard for us to make a trade deal. How does that have anything to do with financial and trade agreements?
The President of the United States has his foreign affairs power, where he can manage relations under the Constitution with foreign countries. Congress delegated to the President the ability to take economic action in response to national emergencies in the International Economic Emergency Powers Act. And for example, the Treasury Department, they have a number of sanctions where they can actually cut off a country's trade with the United States, prohibit goods, cut them off from our financial system for geopolitical reasons. So the fact that they can do that, almost certainly the president can do something that's not as expansive and just put a fee on those goods, which is a tariff.
So let me ask you about Brazil, because the U.S. has a trade surplus with Brazil. That means, we sell them more than we buy from them. So it doesn't seem to be consistent here when you have the president put 50% tariffs on Brazil, one of the highest of any countries. And at the same time, the president is bringing up things that have nothing to do with trade when he's justifying them. He sent a letter to the current government complaining about the prosecution of his ally, Bolsonaro, who allegedly staged a coup when he lost the last election. The president called it a witch hunt. This seems politically motivated and not about trade.
There's a 10% tariff on Brazil because we have a surplus with them. That's the reciprocal tariff. And then there's a 40% tariff that the president has chosen to do under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, like we would do any sanction where we see geopolitical issues. The president has seen in Brazil, like he's seen in other countries, a misuse of law, a misuse of democracy, what one might call lawfare. It is normal to use these tools for geopolitical issues. I mean, sanctions, we've been using them for years with all kinds of countries.
You view tariffs and sanctions as the same?
They're just different in degree. I mean, tariffs are actually lighter than a sanction. A sanction, you're cutting off a country from your financial system. You're prohibiting trade with them. A tariff, you're allowing trade. You're just putting a fee on it. It's a lesser step than sanctions.
You have moved far away from dealing with the deficit. Now you are talking about politically motivated trade actions here. I mean, the president sent a letter to President Lula saying the tariffs are due in part to Brazil's insidious attacks on free elections. Why are you trying to influence a criminal trial of an ally of President Trump?
The president of the United States historically, whether it's a Democrat or a Republican, they have used IEEPA to impose sanctions for all kinds of geopolitical reasons in all kinds of countries. Sometimes it's countrywide, sometimes it's specific to certain individuals, and often foreign leaders and foreign officials. So this is not way outside the market.
When it comes to trade, the big deal that is pending out there is how is the president going to deal with China? There's an August 12th deadline, and if that deadline is not met, you have said tariff levels could snap back to above 80%. Is that deadline going to slide?
So that's what's under discussion right now. I would say that our conversations with the Chinese have been very positive. We have discussions at the staff level, at my level. President Xi and President Trump have had conversations.
They said that it's sliding. The Chinese said it's sliding.
That's something we're working toward. That's what we talked about.
So you're not there yet.
And so they want to do that. We're working on some technical issues, and we're talking to the president about it. I think it's going in a positive direction. I'm not going to get ahead of the president, but I don't think anyone wants to see those tariffs snap back to 84%.
Did you get any commitments in those 2 days of talks in Stockholm?
So yes, we did. Yes, we talked about, and I won't go into detail because they're confidential conversations between two governments, but they really focused on rare earth magnets and minerals. China has put a global control on the world, and so for the United States, we're focused on making sure that the flow of magnets from China to the United States and the adjacent supply chain can flow as freely as it did before the control. And I'd say we're about halfway there.
You can find our full interview with Ambassador Greer on our website, facethenation.com, and our YouTube page. We'll be right back. And we're back with Bank of America CEO Brian Moynihan. Good morning, and thank you for being here with us.
It's good to be here again, Margaret. Hope you're doing well.
Well, I'm hoping you can give us some clarity here on what's going on with the economy. Your Bank of America economists say no rate hikes this year and no recession. Is that still the case after Friday's jobs report?
Yeah, it's still the case. And that's a less growth than they would have had 6-9 months ago and reflects the impact of the tariff war and the trade and all that. But they still think we continues to grow. We're growing at a slow rate, say 1.5% this year, a little more next year, and a little more the year after that. But it'll take inflation for the Fed to get inflation out of the system really through the end of 26 into 27 down to the 2% level. And that's why they have the Fed holding. What they believe is sort of in the middle of next year, the Fed will start cutting and bring the Fed funds rate closer to what would be a more normal rate around 3%, 3.5%.
So even though we saw this really kind of astounding dissent by two members of the Fed saying we do need to move on interest rates, your prediction from your economists is that that's not appropriate at this time.
They don't think they're going to move. Now, the market says they're going to move in September, maybe twice this year. The market was at 7 times 1 point this year. Now they're down to 2. Then they're down to 1. Now they're up to 2. This is going to move around. But the reality is two things people should really keep in focus. One is until the inflation is out of the system, the Fed's going to be very careful, and that's what they said. And then secondly, the rate we're going to go to is a rate that is more normal than pre-global financial crisis, more of a 3%, 3.5% rate, which actually means the American economy is probably functioning better, frankly.
So on that point, the Wall Street Journal, when we were reading in, puts the tariff tax increase as costing $360 billion a year. That's one of the largest tax increases in history, they say. Do you believe the administration's arguments that it's really only foreigners who are going to pay the cost of this? Do you think economists are overstating the negative impact?
Well, I think no one really knows, honestly, because this is a different regime than we've been in before. And so they're trying to extrapolate from things from 50 years ago when the economies are different structured. Our team thinks it has an impact on inflation of about 30, 40 basis points.
Meaning adding to prices people are paying.
Yeah, adding to the inflation rate in the United States. But we need to back up. What the real impact right now is the new Trump administration coming in had 4 or 5 policy areas they were really going to go after, having learned in the 4 years they had to move very quickly. Those were around trade and tariff and immigration and taxation and deregulation. What businesses, and I just was in the Midwest with a bunch of businesses, are all trying to do is figure out what the answer will be so they can go ahead and make their plans for 26. So the activity that's slowed down has more to do with people just trying to figure out the answer. And it doesn't mean every answer is acceptable, but most answers are. So what they have answers on? Obviously, a tax bill getting done. That's a good answer for business because it makes the rates permanent. What's the second thing they have an answer on? They have an answer now on the range of trade possibilities. And so as they think about the trade possibilities, they sit there and say, tariffs might not be worse than X. They see some deals getting done, all of which is good work. What they don't have an answer on is deregulation. Yes, the new regulations stop, but they're hoping for more deregulation so that will help their business models going forward. And then the last is immigration. What will immigration really settle in like? And that's what they tell us. So they're not using their lines of credit. The indications from them are they're being a little more cautious, really waiting for some answers.
Businesses aren't hiring either, we saw in this jobs data on Friday. It was the worst 3 months for job growth since the pandemic. Your firm, when I was reading the analysis, points to a number of different factors, and one of them is artificial intelligence and the adoption of that impacting hiring. How dramatically is it reshaping the job market?
Well, I think this is sort of a question of almost a glass half full, half empty type of thing. So the impact.
No pun intended.
Yeah, exactly. Sorry about that. But the impact of technology on human work content as a percentage of productivity has been huge. In our company, in 2010, when I started with the management team, we had 285,000 people. We have 212,000 people today. That was the impact of technology. We're bigger, more customers, more transactions, more reports to the government, more data, et cetera. So the impact has always been huge. AI gives you a place to go that we've never been able to go before. In other words, there are jobs that take text, think about it, and produce it. Many, many jobs in our company, our research team. Now you're able to maybe use a machine to enhance that activity. So we believe that people who harness AI for their benefit are going to be very successful. That my teammates who harness AI for their benefit are very successful. It's nervous making for young kids now saying, will the jobs be there for me? And
right.
Then I say, look back historically. America has a lot more people working here, and think about the amount of technology came out over the last 50 years, and we have twice as many people working in this country as we did 50 years ago, twice as many, and the population's only gone up by about a third. So think about that dynamic as it finds its way through it. That's the glass half full part of it, but it will have an impact. I don't think it's impacting a lot right now because many companies are just trying to learn how to use it.
Yeah.
Technology has impacted, and AI gives it a place to go. It hasn't gone so far.
So we're talking about all the unknowns and why it's kind of hard to model things right now.
Exactly.
Well, Friday, the president fired, as you know, the head statistician that comes up with these jobs numbers and presents them to the public. The former head, during the first Trump administration, came out in her defense and said this is without merit and it undermines credibility of data. Are you concerned by this firing, and do you feel there is political pressure here?
Well, I think that's more politics, and I know I'm in Washington, D.C., and that's what we're supposed to talk about.
Government data.
But the reality is the data.
It's
2025. It's 2025, and the data should be able to be. They use surveys and things like that, which frankly just aren't as effective anymore. So if you look at the rate of people who respond to their surveys, it's down from 60% level to 50% level. You know, we don't use surveys as aggressively as we do. We watch what consumers really do. We watch what businesses really do. They can get this data, I think, other ways. And I think that's where the focus ought to be. How do we get the data to be more resilient and more predictable and more understandable? Because what bounces around is restatements. And that was one of the largest restatements going back 5 or 7 years into the pandemic, 5 years in the pandemic. That creates doubt around it. And so I think the key is let's spend some money. Let's bring the information together. Let's find where else in the government money is reported. We report millions and millions of data points to the government every day. The data's out there somewhere.
Finally, back in January, you were at Davos. President Trump talked about Bank of America.
Many conservatives complained that the banks are not allowing them to do business within the bank, and that included a place called Bank of America. They don't take conservative business, and I don't know if the regulators mandated that because of Biden or what.
Do you want to respond to the allegation that conservatives are not being allowed to do business with your bank?
We have 70 million consumers, and we're the biggest small business lender. So that's not it. The issue they're focused on is the regulators' impact on this industry. And you heard Senator Scott talk about this week. This reputation, this after-the-fact look that you banked X, and now after the fact you're going to say X didn't turn out to be what you thought. So we look at it based on risk. People may feel those decisions are made for some other reason, but we always make it on what's best for our company, what's best for the client.
Are there industries you're uncomfortable doing business with?
No, we do business with really
guns, oil and gas, tobacco, all of it?
We do business with all those industries. Individual companies, because of credit decision stuff, that's different. But the reality is that if they gave us clarity from the regulatory thing and avoid the second guessing, that would be helpful. And I think that's what the president was pointing out if you listen to him.
All right. Brian Moynihan, thank you for giving us some insight into the data you are seeing. Face the Nation will be back in a moment. Stay with us. We go now to the Canadian Minister for U.S.-Canada Trade, Dominic LeBlanc, who joins us this morning from Moncton, Canada. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Ms. Brennan.
You were just here in Washington negotiating, and while the talks are officially continuing, you left town without a deal, and you left town with now what is a 35% tariff on goods. How much of a setback was the president's decision to do that while you are still at the table?
So we were obviously disappointed by that decision. We believe there's a great deal of common ground between the United States and Canada in terms of building two strong economies that work well together. That's been the history of the 40-year free trade agreement that goes back to President Reagan. We were pleased the United States is respecting the terms of the USMCA agreement. That's vital, we think, to the cost of living and affordability, certainly in the United States. It's true in Canada as well. So we're going to continue to do the work. We left always with a better understanding of the American concerns in the trading relationship. Ambassador Greer, Secretary Lutnick engaged with us in constructive, cordial conversation. So we're prepared to stick around and do the work needed. We think, Ms. Brennan, that the economies of both countries are strengthened when we do things together. The trading relationship between Canada and the United States is unlike other partners. One description which I thought was very apt: we don't sell things to each other as much as we build things together. And that's why it's difficult in this relationship when so much is integrated, but we remain very optimistic.
But you heard Ambassador Greer say because Canada retaliated to the initial tariffs, so all the way back in April when Prime Minister Trudeau was in office, you're paying the price now, even though you have a new government in place. If that's the issue, why not make that concession and pull back?
So Prime Minister Carney, our new Prime Minister, has, we think, built a very business-like, respectful relationship with President Trump. We think that's obviously very important to Canada, and we think to the United States. We're dealing with, take for example, the steel sector in Canada. It's a strategic importance to national security in Canada, as it is for President Trump and the American economy. We now have a situation where there's a 50% tariff. We're the biggest steel export market for the United States.
Right.
We have a 25% tariff. There's a 50% tariff when we want to sell something into the United States. So effectively, we're blocked from doing that. But the national security interest of Canada requires that we have a viable steel and aluminum sector. And my conversations with Secretary Lutnick and others are that therein lies an example where if we do the right work together, we have, Ms. Brennan, the toughest rules of any country dealing with Chinese dumping into Canada. We have melt and pour tracing so that products coming from other countries with Chinese steel can't be dumped into the Canadian market. So we're looking and advancing ideas where we can do that work with the United States, at the same time ensuring that our economy continues to have sectors vital to the economic future of Canada. But that's not in contradiction to President Trump's national security objectives in the United States, of course.
Well, I want to talk to you more about this idea of the so-called Fortress North America to take on China and some of the specifics of the dispute on the other side of this commercial break. Please stay with us. We'll have more questions for Minister LeBlanc shortly. We'll see you in a moment. Welcome back to Face the Nation. We return to our conversation with the Canadian Minister for U.S.-Canada Trade, Dominic LeBlanc. Minister, we were just talking about some of the sectoral tariffs, the metals. American automakers, GM, Ford, Stellantis, they have all said that these tariffs are hurting their profits. The 50% metal tariffs, which use Canadian aluminum. The Secretary of the Treasury was talking about those just the other day. They're seeing the impact here in the United States, a bit of a backfire in some ways. Do you see room for maneuver on these? Are they willing to negotiate with you on those tariffs?
So, Ms. Brennan, we hope so. And as I say, we're encouraged by the conversations with Secretary Lutnick and Ambassador Greer, but we're not yet where we need to go to get the deal that's in the best interest of the two economies. But your example is a good one. Canadian aluminum companies massively supply the American market. And by putting a 50% tariff on aluminum from Canada, you've increased the price of a whole series of goods. The automobile sector, again, is an example where there's been deep integration. We're the biggest customer of U.S.-made automobiles, heavily importing into Canada light and heavy-duty trucks. 50% of the cars that we finish in Canada and sell to the United States are made up of American parts. So therein lies a perfect example where instead of tariffing one another, or President Trump, for his national security reasons under his Section 232 tariffs, wants to have a strong domestic steel, aluminum, automobile sector. Well, so does Canada. And we understand and respect totally the president's view in terms of the national security interest. In fact, we share it. And what we've said to our American counterparts is, how can we structure the right agreement where we can both continue to supply one another in a reliable, cost-effective way that preserves jobs essential to the American economy, but the same thing's true, obviously, in Canada as well.
Well, are there any plans for the two leaders to speak? I saw President Trump said your prime minister called him Thursday and they just never connected. I mean, are tensions that high? And given the changing justification for the tariffs, do you really feel like you're negotiating with the other side in good faith?
Yeah, sure we do. Of course we do. As I say, the conversations have been informative, constructive, and cordial. I would expect the Prime Minister will have a conversation with the President over the next number of days. That's certainly my plan, again, with Secretary Lutnick, recognizing that we think there is an option of striking a deal that will bring down some of these tariffs, provide greater certainty to investment. Ms. Brennan, we passed in Canada our version of the President's One Big Beautiful Bill. It's called the One Canadian Economy Act, which we think will unlock up to $500 billion of investment in Canada for things like pipelines, port infrastructure, mines, all of which offer huge opportunities to American businesses as well. So we think there's a great deal to work on together.
All right, Minister, we'll see if you can get one. We'll be right back. Change is coming for the country's Medicaid system as part of the enactment of the Big Beautiful Bill. To help us understand what's ahead, we turn now to the administrator of the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, Dr. Mehmet Oz. Good morning. Welcome to Face the Nation.
Thank you.
You've got a lot of work ahead. I want to start on drug costs. The president put this 25% tariff on India, big drug producer. The president's trade deal with the EU puts a 15% tariff on imported medicines from Europe. How do you stop the drug makers from passing along those costs to people on Medicare and Medicaid?
Well, the president's letter on Thursday for most favored nation pricing is a good example of that. And he's been working on this tirelessly since the first administration. And just to put this in context for many of the viewers, about 2/3 of bankruptcies in America are caused by healthcare expenses. About 1/3 of people, when they go to the pharmacy, they leave empty-handed. They can't afford the medication. So the president has said, enough global freeloading. We've been covering much of the development costs for new drugs to cure cancer, deal with lots of other illnesses that are life-threatening. It isn't time for the American public to understand that we should not be paying 3 times more for the exact same medication in the same box, made in the same factory. So the president's saying, equalize it out. Let's use a model that's worked, for example, for external threats. That's what NATO did. Everyone has to pay a little more. We'll pay extra too, but we won't pay a lot more than everybody else. So they actually have to raise their contributions, in this case to an internal threat, which is illness. We'll pay a little less than America. That way more Americans can afford these medications, and it's a fair system for the entire globe.
So this was declared in these letters that were sent out to 17 pharmaceutical companies this past week, and it calls for extending that to Medicaid drug prices. Is that intended to offset what will be, cuts to Medicaid? And do you know, if the companies are actually going to follow through on this? Like, how do you actually strong arm them into doing it?
Well, just get the numbers correct. We're putting $200 billion more dollars into Medicaid. So we're actually investing in Medicaid.
Costs are going up. So.
Costs are going up, but there's been a 50% increase in the cost of Medicaid over the last 5 years. So I'm trying to save this beautiful program, this noble effort to help folks, giving them a hand up. And as you probably gather, if Medicaid isn't able to take care of the people for whom it was designed, the young children, the dawn of their life, those at the twilight of their life, the seniors, and those who are disabled, living in the shadows, as Hubert Humphrey said, then we're not satisfying the fundamental obligation of a moral government. And this president has said over and over that he believes that It is the wise thing and the noble thing to help those who are vulnerable. And every great society does that. We're going to as well. So we're going to invest in Medicaid as is required, but we want an appropriate return on that investment. One thing that Medicaid patients should not face are drug prices they can't afford.
Right.
Then,
how do you enforce this?
Well, the pharmaceutical companies, if you sit them down quietly, Margaret, and we've done that, and say, you went into this business at some point because you cared about people. I know there's many out there shaking their heads, but that is actually the truth. People go into healthcare, whether they're pharmaceutical companies or insurance companies or the PBMs or anybody in the space. Even the CMS, the most impressive thing to me in my new task that the president's appointed me to is the remarkable quality of the people within the organization. Just unbelievably talented. They went into this job because they care about healthcare and about people. Somewhere along the lines, people forget. They put numbers ahead of patients. And when that happens, then you start running the problem. So we went to the pharmaceutical companies and we said, you appreciate this is not a fair system. We should not be paying more in America, 3 times more for your products than you charge in Europe. They get the joke. They understand the reality of this problem. They are engaging with us. We're in the middle of those negotiations. The president has a unique power to convene. We've done it with dealing with prior authorization, this heinous process where patients feel like they're trying to get care from a doctor and everything's being done, except all of a sudden the arm of insurance comes in and stops the whole process for unknown reasons for weeks, sometimes months. The insurance companies representing 80% of the American public got together and they said, because we pushed them, we're going to deal with this. We can do the same, I believe, with the pharmaceutical industry with most favored nation pricing. Let
me ask you about the changes that are coming because of this new law to Medicaid, which is jointly administered between the feds and the states. There are major reductions to federal health care spending here. One of the changes are these work requirements. It's about 20 hours a week, volunteer or work, to qualify for health care. What is the guidance you are giving to states on how to implement this? Because in this economy, things are more complicated. Uber driver, independent contractor. How do they show they work their 20 hours a week?
Last weekend, I was at the National Governors Association with Secretary Kennedy, who has been a big advocate of work as well. Every Democratic president and Republican president has said that the foundation of a healthy welfare system, of a social system of support, is work.
Right, but I'm asking how you actually implement that and register it so that people who are working do qualify and they don't get caught up in paperwork because they didn't file something on time. That kind
as long as we're okay that people should work and would want to work, and it's not just work, it's community engagement. They can go get educated, right? They can take care of family members. They can contribute in some other ways, but work's a great way of doing it and get you out of poverty if you can find jobs and elevate yourself. There have been efforts to do this in the past, but they haven't been able to achieve what we can achieve because we have technologies now and we've invested already, as soon as the bill was signed, began pilots to try to demonstrate that we can actually do this correctly. We have pilots now in Louisiana and in Arizona. In both cases, within 7 minutes, you can click on where you're working. You mentioned Uber. You're an Uber driver. You click that button on your phone. It just takes you to your payroll provider. Let's say it's ADP. We then ask your permission. Can we connect with this payroll provider to demonstrate what you've actually been able to work and earn over the past month? This also, by the way, confirms your eligibility. But there's a bigger benefit here. Once you do that, you're in, you're done. However, what if we take one step further, Margaret? What if we go beyond just proving that you tried to work to actually saying, you know what, you didn't work enough, but we can actually help you by connecting you to your employment office.
So you're still figuring out the technology, but isn't there an end of December deadline for a lot of these things to be figured out? And how do you make sure that people don't get kicked off? Because in the state of Georgia, which already had work requirements, they have really struggled to make this work.
Well, a couple of things. It's not the end of December. It's end of December a year from now. And Georgia's apples and oranges. Georgia had a program only for people under the poverty level. And for those people, if they wanted, they could elect to come into a system to help them get jobs. There have been 50,000 reduction in headcount of uninsured people in the overall program in the last 5 years. Overall, Georgia, 2 million less uninsured people. So Georgia's using a lot of tactics, and they're going in the right direction. I would argue that if you have confidence in the American people and their desire to take the offer to try to get a job, if we challenge you to that. And remember, if you're an able-bodied person on Medicaid, you're spending 6.1 hours watching television or leisure time. So you don't want that.
KFF Health Policy found 92% of adult Medicaid recipients already are working, or they have the carve out because they have to have caregivers or they have to do other things.
They're fine. All they have to do is there'll be a simple app. If you've already carved out, that's super simple. If you're supposed to be, if you're able-bodied and you're supposed to be working, we want to help connect you to the job market and get you into work. We have twice as many jobs available in America as people who seem to want them. The foundation of work is not just about fulfilling eligibility. The goal of healthcare insurance is to catalyze action in the right direction, to get you healthier, to give you agency over your future so you recognize you matter.
Sure.
And you should have a job therefore to go out and change the world.
So there's a drug addiction problem in this country. How are those changes going to impact people who are on Medicaid in states like Kentucky, in states like West Virginia?
In many instances, they're carve-outs for folks who have substance use disorder problems. There are programs to
How do
support.
they prove that?
Well, they can either.
Is this in the app?
Yes, it'll be in the app. In the app, again, this is being developed by the United States Digital Service, led by Amy Gleason, who's a wonderful technologist. She and I were with the President and Secretary Kennedy and the head of the czar for AI in this country on Wednesday, talking about overall how we're going to change the use of health technology in America. We've got to get into 2025 with health technology, as is true in every other sector. If you're watching the show right now, you could also have been streaming media. You could take an Uber somewhere, the ride share. You could do an Airbnb. Technology should make the system more efficient. We should have confidence that will also allow us to do what we all agree is possible. If the whole challenge to a work requirement is that you don't have confidence in our ability to accomplish it, that's a separate question, because I do have confidence in the American people, and we have confidence we can pull this off. Look at the passport system, Margaret. Right now, you can go and get a passport in 2 weeks without having to go to the post office, send pictures, and all that's gone. It's fixable. Let's use technology.
I'm still confused on how someone who is in the throes of substance abuse is going to use an app to say I'm in the throes of substance abuse every week to file on
when they go in to get their help for their substance use treatment, assuming they're going for help on that, they can also get enrolled and those requirements can be fulfilled. We want to touch them in as many ways as possible. It's not going to happen just because we put an app out there. You have social workers and other folk elements who care a lot about this population who are coming together, but they have to have some mechanism to report back. That just has not been done well.
Well, and this is incredibly detailed, and that's why we wanted to have you on. I have so many more questions for you on rural hospitals and some of the other criticisms. I have to leave it there for now, but thank you, Dr. Oz.
Can I give you 30 seconds on rural hospitals, because this is important. You have 7% of Medicaid money going to rural hospitals. We're putting $50 billion. The president wants us, the Congress wants us.
There are a lot of questions about how you're going to dole that out and whether you have already made promises. Do you have any specifics for us?
Yes, it's going to be, they'll get the applications in early September. The money is designed to help you with workforce development, right-sizing the system, and using technology to provide things like telehealth that can change the world. But imagine if we can change the way we think about the delivery of health and make it more about getting people healthy so they can thrive and flourish and be fully present in their own lives and as Americans.
Dr. Oz, we'll leave it there. We'll be back in a moment. We turn now to New Mexico's Democratic Governor, Michelle Lujan Grisham. She joins us from Santa Fe. Governor, 2 out of 5 New Mexicans are on Medicaid. You've got a lot of rural hospitals. Have you figured out how to implement everything Dr. Oz just laid out?
Absolutely not. There is no real way to implement this. It's more paperwork for everyone. It's more paperwork for federal government, for state governments, for county governments, for local hospitals, for independent providers. And you know what Americans really hate, Margaret? When you go to your primary care physician and you spend 20 minutes sitting at a chair, not even on the exam table, while they are inputting data into a computer. So this doesn't make any sense. We should be a society and a country that is connecting people to healthcare providers. I think the one thing that Dr. Oz represents that's a fair representation is we should be healthier as Americans. All right. Then we need to be moving out of poverty. We need drug prices. We should talk about that to come down. So go after insurance companies, do manufacturing here, make sure we can negotiate fair prices. Let states do that, because I guarantee you will do a better job than the federal government. And lastly, get people early, easy access. Today, more than half or about half our small businesses don't even offer health care coverage. So you can get a job, but now what?
Yeah. Well, you said, though, in your state, because as a governor, you're going to have to figure this out. You have reserve cash from some oil and gas revenues, as I understand it, that have been put aside. Doesn't that show it is possible for the federal government to shift more responsibility back to the states? That's the argument conservatives are making.
They are, and it's temporary. There is no way any state, including this one, which frankly I am really proud of, we are in really good financial shape. That takes planning and effort. You know, our job projections continue to be met and exceed, unlike the federal jobs report, which is going in the opposite direction. So I don't know where all these jobs are going to be in this anemic economy. I mean, it's so bad. The last time it was this bad, I was in college, and let me tell you, that was a very long time ago. And so, yes, temporarily we can do that, but you can't do it over the long haul. The loss minimally to New Mexico over less than a decade is between 12 and $13 billion. And when, not if, rural hospitals and local providers close their doors, I can do this better than any other state. The last governor completely canceled behavioral health.
Yeah.
6 years later, we are still reeling from trying to rebuild. We put $1 billion into behavioral health just this last legislative session. It is not so easy to rebuild something out of nothing.
Well, the $50 billion rural health care fund under this Republican law is supposed to give people, your states like yours, the ability to come and say, we need this extra cash. Are you going to have to ask for that?
I'm going to ask for every dollar the federal government has put aside anywhere that benefits a New Mexican. So you got $50 billion, that's $1 billion for each state if it was even. Do you know how much money it would take to shore up rural hospitals? More than $1 billion. And to put that in perspective, let me do this. It's $1 billion just for behavioral health. It's $1 billion plus just to keep people's coverage. It's another $1 billion for prescription drugs. It's $1 billion for rural provider delivery investments. And that's only 50 hospitals. You have hundreds of hospitals, 400 rural hospitals across America that will shutter. So if that's the number, and it is, how do we pick these rural hospitals? And if you pick a southeastern rural hospital in New Mexico, what about the rural hospital in western New Mexico? Economies fail, people have to move away, you don't have any OB/GYN care. That whole area collapses. And they are reducing rural healthcare delivery by about $134 billion. So the $50 billion is just to make someone somewhere feel like they recognize that this is a disaster. $900 billion out of Medicaid is catastrophic, straight up.
Governor, we ran through a lot of material here. I have more questions for you, but very quickly, can you tell me, you deployed the National Guard to counter unrest in New Mexico. How's that different from what the president did in California?
Well, they're not policing. They're doing the back end work so that trained community policing and members of that training, those local police officers, they're on the streets. What we have in this country is a shortage of police officers. What I have in New Mexico is a partnership. So they're doing all of the, they answer all of the emergency calls. They handle all the traffic clearance when we've got a crash. And it is working. We're beginning to see more productive fentanyl, drug dealing, high-end arrests than we did without the Guard. And I'm really proud of that work. This is about partnering and leveraging, not about indiscriminately going after individuals who have not committed serious crimes.
Thank you for your time today.
You're
Face the Nation will be right back. We turn now to the war between Israel and Hamas. Our Deborah Pato went with the Israel Defense Forces into Gaza last week, a rare visit for journalists. She filed this report.
Hunger has forced an impossible choice in Gaza: risk gunfire or starvation. They shoot constantly, said this teenager. This boy was standing next to us and he was killed. Hundreds have been killed near the US-funded Gaza Humanitarian Foundation aid hubs controlled by the Israeli Defense Forces, which denies it fires on desperate crowds. But under global pressure, the IDF allowed more UN supplies in this past week and took us to an aid collection point just inside Gaza to prove they are not deliberately starving Palestinians. The IDF has brought us here to demonstrate that, as far as they're concerned, their responsibility for delivering aid stops right here. But look at what happens in this UN footage as it tries to deliver that food.
It's kids. It's children.
Shots landing right in front of desperately hungry Palestinians. In this World Food Programme video, one of their trucks is looted by people so crazed with hunger, they say, they'll do anything to get something to eat. Inside Gaza, there are still 20 living hostages who've been held for 667 days, including Rom Braslavsky and Eviatar David. Hamas released new propaganda footage of David looking so skeletal, his brother Eli fears he is on the brink of death.
Hamas is using Eviatar in one of the most horrific and calculated campaigns of cruelty imaginable.
According to a recent poll, 3 out of 4 Israelis want the hostages freed in exchange for an end to this war.
That's our Deborah Pata reporting from Israel. Thank you for watching. I'm Margaret Brennan.